Hi all. I don't know if you can hear me. My other machine melted down and I'm having trouble getting the speakers to work on this one, so I apologize. I may run and get some headphones. Technical difficulties. I will do that and be right back. Hello. Did that work? I still can't hear anybody.
Well, I can hear you better now.
Okay, now I can hear you. Fantastic. All right, I apologize for that. With that, and no further ado, it being 3 minutes after 7, welcome everybody. Vice Mayor, council members in service. I call this special meeting of the Albany City Council for July 26th, 2022 to order. And I will read the, if I can find it, I will read the land acknowledgement. I apologize. This a machine going down really doesn't make my day. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of the Shawn. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Council member Gary looks like absent. Council member McQuay?
Here.
Council member Nason?
Here.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann?
Here.
And Mayor Jordan?
Here.
Mayor, you just muted yourself.
We go on to discussion of possible action items. Thank you, Vice Mayor. Item 3.1 is potential submittal of the working draft, the housing element, to the California Department of Housing and Community Development. May Council have staff's report, please.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. Good evening to Council. My name is Jeff Bond, Community Development Director for the city. Thank you for the opportunity to bring to you tonight our draft housing element. We're particularly grateful to be able to do this with a special meeting. We realize that cuts into your regular schedules quite a bit. I'm joined this evening by our consultant, Barry Miller. Before turning it over to Barry for a full presentation, I'd like to address a couple of things that have come to our attention. First, we realize that there is a lot of material to review, some of which was available as a part of the agenda materials as an attachment to the staff report, and some that was available on the city's website. We're revising a recommendation this evening to you to propose a modified schedule that gives the council and the public more time to review the material before the council authorizes sending the draft to the state for their review. Specifically, our plan is to take any comments you have this evening, consolidate those into one document by the end of the week, so that everybody has essentially the month of August to review a clean, complete document, and then come back to you in September. Your first meeting in September is September 6th, right after Labor Day. And at that time, ask you to authorize us to send it to the California Department of Housing and Community Development. So secondly, I'd like to just briefly mention, and of course we can take questions on this if necessary, talk about the content and engagement process that's associated with the preparation of a housing element. And in short, it's highly scripted by state law. It's different than a lot of other planning processes that we typically go through. The state specifically expects us in every city that's preparing a housing element to reach out to stakeholders that represent tenants and groups that have historically been impacted by housing discrimination, and to consider policies and programs that address those issues. And we've attempted to do that. We will continue to do that as well. For people and groups that haven't yet been reached out to and are just learning about this process, your input is valuable, and with council guidance can be incorporated into the document as the process evolves this evening and in upcoming months. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Barry to give you a presentation on the material that's before you this evening and on the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And let me confirm that everyone can see my screen. I'm going ahead and maximizing this. Okay, thank you very much, and good evening, council members. We have a presentation to start the discussion this evening. Covers a little bit of what Jeff just went over with respect to schedule, but really what the presentation does is it highlights what the housing element is and what some of the changes are between this housing element and the previous one. I think most of the council is aware of what's on this slide, but for the benefit of the public, this is a mandatory section of the Albany General Plan. Every city and county in California is required to prepare an updated housing element every 8 years according to a schedule that's set by the state. In this case, all of the Bay Area cities are on the same schedule. Last year was Los Angeles's turn. The year before that was Sacramento and San Diego's turn. So it's kind of a rotating schedule, which eases the workload at the State Department of Housing and Community Development, which is HCD, and you'll hear me use a number of acronyms. That's probably one of the more important ones. The housing element is where we set forth our city's policies for housing conservation, housing production, particularly the development of affordable housing and housing for special needs people. As Jeff said, this is a very prescriptive process. The contents of the housing element are established by state law, and they've become much more complicated and expansive over the last 8 years. The planning period is 8 years, so we are ending a cycle now that is January 2015 to January 2023. The plan that we're doing now is for the 6th cycle, which is January 2023 to January 2031. So essentially 8 years starting in January. This is also the only part of the general plan that's subject to certification by a state agency. In this case, again, it's HCD. And if we don't have a certified housing element at the conclusion of this process, there are a number of complications. Some are legal, some are financial. There are increased risks of lawsuits and financial penalties and so on. So very quickly, I'm just going to, this is the existing process that's been followed to date, and I'm just going to kind of go through where we are. Those yellow stars, by the way, indicate Planning Commission meetings on the housing element that took place over the last year and a half. Beginning in February 2021, when we received what's called our RENA assignment, again, another acronym. I've got another slide coming up that tells you a little more about what that is. This is the number of housing units that we're given by ABAG, and we must plan for that quantity of housing. Whether we build it or not, we have to demonstrate that we have the capacity to accommodate a certain number of housing units at different income levels. So the various steps that we went through, first is an evaluation of the existing housing element. How are we doing in implementing our policies and programs? If we're falling short, what can we do to improve our performance? The housing needs assessment, which is really a comprehensive look at our demographics, our income and economic characteristics, our housing conditions, housing stock, the percentage of people that are paying more than a third or half of their incomes on rent, and so forth. Next is the housing sites inventory, which is a comprehensive summary of all of the properties where we believe that they present the best opportunities for housing in the city, particularly housing that could be affordable or housing that could be lower income. The housing constraints analysis looks at our zoning, our subdivision and impact fees, things that could potentially be obstacles or impediments to housing production, and then the affirmatively furthering fair housing, AFFH section looks at the steps that the city is taking to promote fair housing, and also the ways that housing discrimination and past housing practices may have shaped land use patterns and current housing needs in the city. All of this feeds into our goals, policies, and programs. These various steps were done kind of in sequence. I would say that the AFFH was really the guiding light through the whole process, and that is per state law. Wanted to also point out that concurrently with this process, you were considering a specific plan that was about 6 months ahead of the housing element. It started a little bit before we did. It was adopted last week, and that set the stage for some of the conversation we're going to have this evening. So this is the schedule of what is yet to come. And starting on the left, we have a requirement now to publish a working draft of the housing element, and that remains out for public comment for 30 days. At the end of that 30 days, we have a statutory requirement to keep the document out for another 10 calendar days in order to consider any comments that came in during the 30 days. I want to mention that's a new requirement that went into effect on January 1st of 2022. Another new requirement is that once we submit this to HCD, they now have 90 days to review the draft and issue their comments. It was 60 days until January, so essentially they lopped about 70 days off our schedule. And we will come back to the council on September 6th to summarize the public comments. At that point, we will be asking you for consent to submit this draft to the state. At that point, the state will begin its review. So we will get our comments back from HCD in December. At that point, we'll need to revise the document based on their comments and bring forward a public review draft for consideration first by the Planning Commission and then by the City Council. Once that is adopted, which is right now scheduled for the end of January 2023, we will submit it again to HCD, and then there is a sort of a iterative process where the state determines if it still needs revision in order to be found incompliant. And I do want to point out that the state is they're grading much tougher than they used to, and in Southern California, only 10% of the 196 jurisdictions have been found in compliance, and this is 9 months after their elements were due. So it's a bumpy road to reach the finish line in this process, but we're prepared to stick with it for the long run and get a certified element. So I mentioned the RENA, which is our share of the region's housing needs. In the Bay Area as a whole, the regional housing need, which is calculated by the state, increased by a factor of about 2.5 between the last cycle and the next cycle. So the regional need was determined to be over 441,000 units. ABAG assigned that need to individual cities based on a formula that took into consideration things like population, employment, access to public transportation, and the distribution of wealth around the region, so that more affluent cities got larger shares of lower income units and less affluent cities got larger shares of above moderate income units. So our share in this process was 1,114 units. which is more than 3 times what it was in the previous cycle. And you can see here that that's distributed by income, with about just under 500 units in the low and very low income categories, the remainder being above moderate and moderate. So that low and very low income is primarily housing that is affordable, that's built through some kind of tax credit or subsidy program. In some cases, we can get credit for accessory dwelling units that are in that low income bracket based on the market rents that are being charged. The above moderate and moderate are mostly market rate housing. So part of the housing element is identifying opportunity sites. This is your opportunity site map in the draft element. It indicates the sites along San Pablo Avenue, along Solano Avenue. We are adding Albany Hill to the inventory. It was actually in the inventory in the 4th cycle and removed from the inventory in the 5th cycle. There are a number of programs in the housing element specifically related to that site. By the way, the colors on this map indicate the zoning, so that yellow is lower density residential zoning, and the red are mixed use, and the purple are projects that are in the development pipeline. In other words, they're already approved. So with these sites, we get our 1,114 units. Again, it's a capacity exercise. This is not saying that all of these sites are going to be developed. It's merely showing that we have the zoning and the land available to meet this assignment. So in terms of the housing element document itself, it is comprised of 6 chapters that you see laid out here. There are also 3 appendices. I won't go into detail on each one, but drafts of these chapters are on the Planning Department website. In most cases, these were reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission at their meetings that took place during late 2021 and early 2022. The affirmatively furthering fair housing mandate is new to the housing element. It was passed by the state legislature in 2017. And what it requires is that we approach this task through an equity lens, meaning that our outreach program is intentionally geared toward lower income residents, tenants, and residents with special needs. There is a dedicated section of the document that deals with fair housing, including many maps and tables looking at the distribution of our population by race, ethnicity, income, tenure, and other factors. There's the analysis of sites needs to be done through the lens of making sure that no one neighborhood is impacted by an excessive concentration of housing opportunity sites. And then our goals and our actions, the programs that are in the document, must make a contribution toward fair housing issues. So before we dive into the policies and programs, just a quick brief reminder of what these terms mean. So each section of the document includes a goal, which is a broad statement that expresses an ideal future condition. And each goal has a number of policies. These are somewhat more specific statements that help us make decisions on each topic area. And then the policies are implemented through programs, which are specific steps that have someone they can be assigned to, or a timeline that can be attributed to them. They require a certain number of resources, and those are all identifiable in the housing element. There are also objectives, which are measurable targets, such as the number of housing units that we're aiming to produce during the 8-year time period. So the method for updating the policies and programs began with an evaluation of our existing plan and a really kind of fine-grained evaluation of how we were doing on each program, which you see on the left, coupled with the community input that took place at a community workshop in December and the 8 meetings of the Planning and Zoning Commission. There was also a city council briefing in March on the element. And then that is merged with the data collection and analysis and our new state laws to help inform where we go. So if you add all of those things together, we have 6 goals in the housing element. 5 of these are in the existing housing element, although they've been wordsmithed, I would say, from 8 years ago. And the sixth goal, which is to improve financial resources for affordable housing, was a message that came from both our community, and this really was kind of a thread in the previous element, but we felt it warranted its own goal. I want to mention that the first goal, which is equitable access to housing in all Albany neighborhoods, has been retooled from what it was 8 years ago. This goal in the last housing element was really about conserving our single family character in our single family neighborhoods. And one of the messages that came through this process is our neighborhoods are dynamic and they're changing. And in order to promote equity in the way we build housing, we should make create opportunities for other housing types in all neighborhoods. And so this is really kind of some of the same policies, but a slightly different angle to that goal. The other goals are primarily in line with what they were 8 years ago. We used an equal sign in a house to show as an icon just which policies and programs specifically affirmatively furthered fair housing, and then just for ease of reference, those policies or programs that are new to the sixth cycle housing element are highlighted. So there are 59 policies and 53 programs, a slight gain over what we had last time. I would say the greatest changes are in the program. So there are quite a few new or substantially updated programs in this document. So in goal 1, I'm just going to quickly go through each of the 6 goals and highlight some of the new programs, and then we can, the presentation ends shortly after that. We look forward to your feedback on both the new programs and the carryover programs, where the program 1A is to revise the R1 single family zoning district to allow duplexes and other housing types. Policy 1B is to repeal the remainder of 1978 Measure D. Now, this Measure D was mostly, most folks associated with the parking requirements, and those were rescinded in a previous ballot measure a few years ago. But there is some leftover in Measure D. Actually, there's a requirement that R1 zoning can only be changed through a petition of all residents within 300 feet of a property, and that also would need to be repealed to achieve some of the goals of the housing element. There are links to the Climate Action Plan, Program 1G about electrification and renewable energy, and then also looking at creating incentives for affordable ADUs. And I'll use this opportunity to also say, this is meant to be a roadmap for the next 8 years. And when you adopt the housing element, you are not adopting all of these changes. You're basically saying these are programs to be carried out over an 8-year period so that, for example, you would not repeal Measure D the day this gets adopted. It's simply an action item to be implemented during the time horizon. And I think that's an important consideration, both in terms of the impact of this document and the resources available. So under Goal 2, we have a program to modify Measure K, which is a zoning restriction on a parcel on Albany Hill, which currently limits the density to 6 units per acre, which is just half of the density that's permitted in the R1 zoning district. That is the largest privately owned opportunity site in the city, and there may be opportunities for more units. Revisions to the inclusionary zoning ordinance, which is currently set so that 15% of all new market rate housing is set aside for as affordable. There's been some interest in increasing that to 20%. That would require further study and further consideration, further community conversations, but it is an action item to explore that. The San Pablo specific plan, which was just adopted, would be implemented during this time period. There would be additional housing developed at UC Village that's planned by the university, and then additional study of the Marin San Pablo Avenue node. This is the gas station, City Hall, and so forth, another area where there may be long-range potential for housing. Goal 3, which is really focused on special needs. There are some new programs that address the needs of older adults, including facilitating the development of an affordable senior housing development in Albany, looking at ways to get a larger number of our units accessible to persons with disabilities, to create more opportunities for families to live in Albany, particularly lower income families. So this is creating affordable 3-bedroom units, and then allowing for single room occupancy and low barrier navigation centers in the city, both of which, well, the low barrier navigation center is a new state law that was approved about 2 years ago. Under Goal 4, there are some specific changes to the residential zoning districts that are proposed. We went through these in detail with the Planning and Zoning Commission at their last meeting, looking at the R2 zone and whether we still need an R2 zone, given changes that might happen in the R1 district, implementing the zoning changes in the San Pablo commercial the San Pablo specific plan area. There are also some zoning changes proposed for Solano Avenue, and then also continuing to look at our parking standards. This is really just a commitment to keep evaluating our parking standards and see whether there are ways to reduce the cost of housing by changing our standards. Goal 5, which really focuses on fair housing, has been expanded to also cover anti-displacement strategies and tenant protection. We did receive a fair amount of input from the Diverse Housing Working Group, and Albany Thrives Together on some tenant protection measures they would like the city to consider. Again, this is framed as something to be evaluated after the housing element is adopted, not something that goes into effect concurrently with adoption. Looking at things like tenant opportunity to purchase, greater awareness of the affirmatively furthering fair housing mandate, more advocacy for the use of housing choice vouchers, and more inclusive outreach for housing. Finally, Goal 6, which looks at our financial resources, strongly recommends that the city create a housing coordinator position and continue to explore potential new funding sources for housing, including potentially local sources such as a bond measure, and also leverage our nonprofits, our volunteer organizations, and look at possibilities such as land trusts and limited equity partnerships in the city. So final slide, what we're requesting is your authorization to publish the working draft. That will begin the 30-day review process. We will then have the 10-day process at the end of that to consider any public comments, and we'll be coming back to the council on September 6th. At that point, we will be asking that you approve submittal of the working draft to HCD. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. And with that, we will go to council questions. Are there any council members who have questions? Okay, I'm not in the best position with what I've got going on. Yes, Vice Mayor Tiedemann, please go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. I had a couple questions about specific policies. So first, I think it's 2E, which I think is the lot consolidation. Do we have any info on how much that's been used? Because I think it said it's a carryover of how many lots we've consolidated in the past couple of years.
I know that the 540 San Pablo Avenue project is doing lot consolidation. Jeff probably has more information on that.
That's correct. There will be a application that will come forward to combine what today is 9 parcels into one parcel. And there were, so for the project, the townhouse project at Portland and Keynes, there were also some adjustments to property lines and reconfiguration of property lines to accommodate that project. The two that come to mind.
Okay, so people have been taking advantage of it when the development necessitates it.
That's correct.
Great. For 4A, I think this happened in on our P and Z, but I was wondering why the reference taking out to reducing the front setback was removed from the document on our agenda.
Yeah, that did come from the Planning and Zoning Commission. It was a strong recommendation from one of the commissioners to focus on the rear setback and not the front setback. Certainly something that could be revisited once you actually begin the revisions, but that was at this point felt premature to make a definitive statement like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then just lastly on 4D, which I think is in reference to Solano. Why was the FAR of 2 chosen and not something higher, and the same for the height that's recommended there?
So the FAR of 2 is what was in the existing general plan for Solano Avenue, and that was the foundation for that selection. There was always, I think, a question about whether the 2 was meant to be before a density bonus or after. So this is just saying it's before any bonus. It's the base density is 2, not 1.25. So we didn't go higher at this point, I think, because we're trying to get somewhere in the vicinity of that 63 dwelling unit per acre mark, which is about where a 2.0 FAR will get you. Yeah, again, I think you'd need to do a little bit more evaluation before going higher than that. The parcels are really much smaller on Solano than San Pablo, so they're less conducive to the larger FAR buildings.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember McQuaid.
Thank you. I have a few comments, but I do have a question on the attachment A, program 1C on page 6. It refers to code enforcement. And as you may have learned over the last 8 years, I'm a big fan of code enforcement. And I'm wondering if this position could somehow be folded into the housing coordinator position as a piece of that. Just sort of a suggestion. And I have some comments on language, but I think they come more under comments than under questions, so I'll hold those for now.
With respect to your question on code enforcement and housing coordinator, of course, it depends on the particular skill set of the person. Normally, I would expect that to be 2 very different skill sets and experiences, so probably not. Be difficult to find someone that has experience in both areas.
Okay, that makes sense. But since we're calling out code enforcement, perhaps we can start thinking about that as a real position.
Do you have any other? Nope, I guess not. Councilmember Gary.
Thank you. For the record, I just wanted to announce that I am on, and I tried to get into the system at 7 o'clock, but apparently the system would not allow me. So just for record, I am present here. Just a couple of questions. Goal 3. I guess my question, and I may have missed this, so if you're repeating yourself, I apologize because I didn't get the first couple minutes, but how are we defining affordable housing here in Albany, and what matrix are we using in order to put that up on the umbrella that when we do have housing in, it's well defined and we know exactly what we're working with at that time?
Thanks. That's a great question, and it really varies depending on the size of the household and whether you're talking about what's affordable to a low income, very low income, or moderate income household. So it's kind of a sliding scale. But in general, it's housing that requires 30% or less of your income. So for all intents and purposes, it's affordable housing would be housing that's geared toward lower income households. For a household of 4, it's $109,600 a year or less. So you would take 1/3, basically 30% of that household's income, and that would be what would be considered affordable. and it varies depending on if it's a 3-person household or a 2-person household and so on.
Okay, will there be any type of scale? And the reason why I'm bringing this up, because I know in other cities, I've seen where affordable housing is broken down, where there's a sliding scale and there's actual amounts. Instead of, 3%, 3%, they have different amounts with the scale and what you fall into and what you qualify for in the apartment. Will that be something that will be added onto this, or that's something later?
That is included in one of the chapters of the housing element. There's a table in chapter 3 that has that information, and it's set by the County of Alameda.
Okay.
Or yeah, it's county specific.
All right, thank you. And then my next question is on the environmental impact study. Are we including this in any portion of the housing, especially in goal 4? I think that should be added. And again, if I missed that, please explain to me.
Jeff, do you want to address the CEQA?
So what we're intending to do, and we'll be continuing to work. You're not making any decisions this evening or even in September regarding the CEQA review. We will be bringing that to you at the end of the process when after the Planning and Zoning Commission has a chance to review it, and then you're making the final decision on the housing element. Having said that, our expectation is that we can bring an addendum to the general plan environmental impact report that we prepared in 2016 that was approved by council at the time, similar to what we did just a few weeks ago with the San Pablo Avenue specific plan. We'll basically be taking those impacts that were identified in that general plan, EIR, and those mitigation measures that were approved and applying them to this project. We think those impacts are going to be the same. We think the mitigation measures that were identified then will continue to be effective at mitigating those impacts. And so under CEQA law basically allows us to do an addendum and not to have to do the whole thing all over again. With respect to the goal 4, was there something specific, a particular topic area such as parking or views or something?
No, that's just my question for now. I'll have to research what you've told me. So thank you so much for your explanation.
You're welcome.
On goal 5, so as you break down the displacement and promote housing opportunities, you have race, national origin, and color. So can you explain that? Like how we breaking this down, if race and color are the same? Like if you can just give clarity to those statements that have been released.
I will check on that, but I believe it's federal language. I don't think that I didn't create that language, so I don't know what the specific distinction is intended to be there.
All right, thank you. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
If I may, I think I'll offer, if I understand correctly, I think it might be helpful that the income thresholds are based on the area median income, which is for the county as a whole. I see Mr. Miller nodding up and down, and I think very low income is less than 50% of area median income for a household of that particular size. Low is over 50 to 80%. If I have that right, and then I don't remember what moderate is. 80 to 120. 80 to 120. Right. So it's pegged to area median or county median income. So as county median income changes, those thresholds change. Councilmember Nason.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. One is on the homelessness strategy. I see that it references the 2018 Everyone Home Plan, but just last month we adopted a new plan, which I believe supersedes that one. It's the Alameda County Home Together Plan, and it has a somewhat different, I think, a better approach than the 2018 plan, and I hope you'd take a look at that. Well, I guess the question would be: is there a reason? Would there be a reason we would use the Everyone Home Plan rather than the Home Together Plan?
I don't think there would be. I think you'd use the most current plan, and this was written before that plan came out.
That's kind of what I assumed. Okay, and then a question about car-free living on page 30. It seems like it's tied there to affordable housing, and I think of car-free living as something that can and should be encouraged for people of many income levels. And I'm curious if that was an intentional, if that's a policy decision, or if I'm maybe just reading the intention wrong there.
I think that policy is carried over from the existing housing element with little or no edits. So at the time, I believe it was just recognizing that transportation costs were, were a major part of a household's expense. And if there was a way to reduce that, to create more disposable income for housing, that was a good thing, a good goal.
Yeah. Okay. Then, I might bring that back up in the comments section, that we consider revisiting that. The other is, UC Village. And I noticed page 17, and we've mentioned this before in discussion, that the University Village housing is not counted as part of our RENA. And I see some comments to the effect that we don't want it counted. I've seen from the public, some folks in the public are saying we shouldn't count it because it's such a specialized form of housing, or it might reduce our incentive to push forward. I tend to feel differently, but I'd like to hear why we don't count that.
The short answer is we can't count that. And the state has more or less said that student housing or housing that's not available to the general public is not countable as credit toward the RENA, which isn't to say that we think that's an important part of the community. It makes an important contribution. It is part of our housing market. So I think what we've tried to do is kind of find a middle ground and say, we may not get RENA credit, and we may not, count these units toward our so-called fair share, but they're important, and we need them, and they're part of our housing plan.
Yeah, I looked at the Housing and Community Development website, and it said that a jurisdiction can take RENA credit for units built on sites controlled by a state, federal, or tribal nation entity, as long as the local government is responsible for reporting the new units. So did we report, or do we report units at the UC Village in our annual Department of Finance housing unit survey? We don't do that because they are part of we do report them as part of our census and our other statistical things that we do.
The most recent so we only report what's new every year. And okay. So the most recent student housing projects were completed, I think, in the early 2000s. I want to say around 2004, 2005 timeframe. So I personally wasn't involved with that, but my expectation is that we will report it and fully disclose exactly what it is. And if the state says that's against their requirements or standards or what have you, then we'll deal with it at that time. But I would be inclined to at least put it out there as housing that's in Albany.
Yeah, I would think so, because housing, it seems to me it's a recognition that housing has both benefits and burdens, and UC Village has both benefits and burdens for Albany. If you'd like me to send you the website link, I'd be happy to do that. All right, and that's those were my initial questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Nason, for catching the latest plan for unhoused people that the city adopted. It was not included in this. My question is, what share of the residences that Albany has to plan for under its RENA allocation are other than on San Pablo and Solano? And I don't expect you to know that to 3 significant digits, but even an approximate fraction.
47%. That's a real number. I actually thought that question might come up, so I calculated.
Oh, really? You're being serious? Okay.
Yeah.
2 significant digits. Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's been an issue that's been ongoing throughout the process, and it's a legitimate issue and one that we are concerned about, and so I think it is important to have that information at our disposal. The part of the complication is the way the state looks at this stuff is by census tract, and the same census tract that has the bowling alley project and the west side of San Pablo Avenue is where Albany Hill is located. And so it appears that we're loading a lot of housing in that census tract, but in fact, it's dispersed within the tract.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize it was. I wouldn't have guessed it would be that high. And so is that your mention of Albany Hill suggests maybe 130. I don't know how many are assigned to that 11-acre property. Where else? Because that would be 47. It's about half. So it's like 600 residences.
No, I'm sorry, I misspoke. The 47% is the percentage of total units that are not on the corridor. So that would include the Solano Avenue corridor. It would include the accessory dwelling units and that are scattered across the city. It would include the west side of Albany Hill, which is 130 units. Okay. R3 sites that are expected to redevelop. So it's
I see. So it was I asked my question fairly quickly. I was asking what percentage were off of both the San Pablo and the Solano corridor.
Okay.
And so the 47% I now understand is off of the San Pablo facing properties.
Right.
Do you have any? So now I'll say, do you know as a fraction what fraction approximately are on the Solano corridor?
Less than 20%, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that puts about a third off of both Solano and San Pablo.
Right.
And maybe a third of that third is on Albany Hill. Okay. Thanks. Could you explain program versus description of the program? So does the description of the program control what the city is going to look at when it gets around to developing the program if it's not already developed?
I think the program statement is intended to just be quick and give you a summary of the intent. And then the description is just a chance to elaborate more on some context, some background, some further explanation about what's intended, and just provide a little more direction in terms of how to actually carry out the program.
Okay, so the specific that I had in mind was that the motivated this question was program 1A, if I'm reading the description correctly, is foundationally based on allowing duplexes in the R1 area with some provision for considering defining certain features that would allow a triplex or a quadplex. And so that, comment was raised on that. So I just want to understand how much that description was actually going to define what the city looks at going forward. Right. Obviously, the city would have latitude. Let's see. Received a comment suggesting removing the requirement for residential to exceed inclusion of residential in a building to exceed current height limit in the notional Solano Avenue changes. And there's a question that wasn't required to go up to the height on San Pablo, the much increased height limits, as understood by this commenter. Is including a residential requirement to access that full building height required to get to that building height in the San Pablo specific plan, or that change? Or could you have an office building that goes up to 68 feet or 85 feet?
Jeff, you may have more insight in that.
So on I'm switching gears here mentally for a second, going back to the specific.
Yeah, sorry, because they kind of meshed. So
for housing development, for housing opportunity sites in the housing element, excuse me, in the specific plan, we said if a site is in the housing element, you can't turn it into a anything other than a housing development site.
Okay.
For a theoretical office building, the standard height requirements in non-housing opportunity sites would be applicable.
Okay, so let me repeat that back to make sure I got it right. So along San Pablo, those sites have designated as housing opportunity sites. If a property developer wants to access the full building height, they need to include residential in those buildings.
Yes, residential above ground floor.
Yeah, okay, residential above, yeah, unless it's high affordable. I think there's maybe some allowance for residential on ground floor then. If the owner of a property / developer of a site on San Pablo that is not a housing opportunity site wants to up the full building height, they can within the limits of, whatever generally allowed uses are. Okay. All right, thanks for clarifying that.
And of note, they don't get the density bonus kinds of things. So a lot of those exceptions that we see on housing projects wouldn't apply.
Okay. Great, thanks. Let's see. Are sales under TOPA law or TOPA programs, I don't know if there's law that controls the design of those programs, solely at market rate? In other words, there's a preference to first buyer, the tenants being, the first in line to buy the property. Does the property sell at market rate, or do they by law get some sort of discount?
I'm not aware of a discount on something like that, but that's something we'd have to look into more as part of that program.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm curious if it is market rate, how do you even determine what market rate is if you have a buyer that's essentially first and right, so you don't have a competitive purchasing environment? So yeah, I'd be curious to know more about that, but I guess that can come back in September, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Received a comment that organizations of owners of residences for rent were not consulted. Could you respond, confirm, deny, characterize, clarify?
Well, I agree that we did not make a specific targeted outreach to the landlords community. Happy to do that. And while we did lots of different kinds of outreach, trying to reach as many different people through many different avenues, I did not specifically pick up the phone until Friday afternoon. But we will do that in good faith and work with them to help them participate fully in the final drafting of the document.
Thanks. And there was a statement that staff did outreach to tenants organizations and housing advocacy organizations. So I don't know, you could talk about why that happened. Again, and Barry can help me out on this, but it was to respond to the anticipated comment from the State Housing Community Development Department that specifically wants us to take those affirmative fair housing steps and to demonstrate that we've done that. Okay, I see. So it was a state expectation.
It was to be able to go into send this draft to them, having accomplished that intent, to that expectation of theirs.
Yeah.
And if I may also add, I think, to the credit of the housing advocacy groups, they're on this and every other housing element in California right now. I'm working on others, and the housing advocates are at the table in every city, and they're very active and engaged in this process and have been participating in our Planning and Zoning Commission study sessions and in stakeholder meetings and so forth. So yeah, I think this is true in every city. You find this in Berkeley and Emeryville and Oakland, et cetera. They're a very engaged group right now. Yeah,
I mean, I'll certainly second that from my advocacy work before I became no longer an advocate and on the council, that you want to watch all the agendas and show up at every meeting that touches the issue of interest to you. So thank you. My understanding is that AB 1482 implemented rent control and just cause eviction, as well as no fault eviction, the conditions on which no fault could occur, and there'd be financial support for the tenants to move to another location. Is my understanding of AB 1482 correct? Are you familiar with AB 1482? I don't know if it was mentioned actually anywhere in the document.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, but not familiar enough to respond to that specific question. I think there are things that it doesn't do that the various advocates are asking, and some of them may be able to speak to that further, but to go beyond what the state, simply what the state requires.
Yeah, okay. I'll come back to that in deliberation. Unless there's any other questions. Not seeing any. Go to public comment. If anyone attending would like to ask a question about or comment on this item, please press your raise hand button. You will have, well, first of all, let me see how many people there are. I guess first I'll say there's about 24 people in attendance. Looks like 4 people out of 5, 6 people have their hands raised. So you will have 3 minutes to make your comment. If you're on the phone, please raise your hand by pressing *9. In this and all comments and questions during the meeting, please address the council, not other attendees, and respect each person that has spoken. The council wants everyone to feel comfortable speaking and not be intimidated by others' comments or reactions. And as I said, there's about 20 attendees right now. City Clerk, please admit the first person. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. This is Jeremiah Garrett Pinguello. So what are we doing about people who sleep in their cars, right? So we have the carpool parking space underneath the freeway. It's gated with security. Why don't we make it where overnight parking is okay? Where maybe someone sleeping in their car can pay $10 a night and it could be a safe place to park, okay? And security there. All right, so now we got people who sleep in their cars. We have a designated location where they can all go. They don't have to be hiding out on city streets, okay? So take that for note. Also, ADUs, low income. So the ADU, what is low income? Is it a % of the applicant's income, or is it gonna be a flat price? $1,500, $1,000? Okay, next one. Is any of this property going to be city owned? Is the city actually going to take action and spend some money, get a grant, and say, hey, we're going to buy some property, and we're going to build something, and it's city owned, city property. Okay, so that could be something there. Also, special needs people. So what about people that need mental health? Let's say sober living. Are we going to offer, is our city going to offer a sober living environment? Okay. And maybe something for the youth, 18 years old to 25 years old. They're 18 years old. Their parents kicked them out of the house. Now they got to go, what, sleep in their car? You know, so we need some youth fair housing. Also, anything we do on San Pablo. Oh, sorry, that's the next agenda item. Let's see here. These are next agenda items, notes. So yeah, basically, I'll use my next minute here, speaking from the heart, speaking like I usually do. So basically, what's going on here is that we got this 8-year plan. Well, what after that? We don't want to develop too fast, too quickly, because what happens after 8 years? We're going to be like, oh, wow, what do we do now? You know, then we're going to have less housing available. So we can't just jam pack this 8 years and be like, we're done, because we got to think the future. What about 10 years, 15? What's our 20-year plan, right? So again, I'm going to re-say what I said before. We need housing for our seniors, like you already said. Okay, great. But we need housing for youth. We need housing for 18 to 25. And we also need sober living environments. And you know what? That safe place underneath the freeway is the best place for people to park their cars. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Clay Larson. Last week I commented on the failure of the city to properly evaluate the impact of San Pablo Avenue specific plan on aesthetic and visual resources in the neighborhoods immediately adjacent to San Pablo Avenue. This failure occurred both during the planning process and in the environmental reports. I wanted another bite of that apple. In listening to Barry Miller's report, the process has moved on a bit, but I think everyone would agree that the San Pablo Avenue specific plan is an important component of the housing element. For the housing element, staff hasn't prepared any environmental documents, but promises sometime in the future to prepare another addendum, which I suspect will look much like the addendum to the specific plan. So my previous comments, I think, are still timely. In response to my previous comments, Community Development Director Jeff Bond claimed that the CEQA law limited evaluation of the environmental impacts of a project on aesthetics to impacts on scenic vistas and scenic highways. I don't think this is correct. I looked at a number of EIRs, and cities can and do look at impacts on the general visual character of the project area, including things like shadowing. Jeff Bond did note that CEQA requirements apply when there's a conflict with the local scenic related regulations. I think this is what's happening in Albany. This is the case in Albany. The previous general plan included scenic related regulations. The development standards for building heights, for setback and daylight planes constitute scenic regulations. And this is reflected in the general plan policies. For example, I'm reading land use elements section E, and it reads, view protection is addressed in the Albany Municipal Code. The zoning regulations include standards for height and bulk, which preserve views, maintain light, air, and protect the aesthetic quality. Gives me goosebumps here. Daylight plane regulations have been adopted so that taller buildings step down in height as they approach property lines in order to preserve privacy and sunlight of the adjacent yards. So I think we do have environmental and scenic related regulations, and the changes to this proposed in the specific plan, the changes to the general plan should have been evaluated in that with respect to those existing regulations. In my letter, I pointed out that El Cerrito, which prepared a full EIR for its 2014 San Pablo Avenue specific plan, not an addendum, a full EIR, was in the process now of updating their specific plan. And last week prepared a draft supplemental environmental impact report, not an addendum again. El Cerrito, in its updates, El Cerrito counted views of the Albany Hill and the East Bay Hills as quote unquote scenic vistas. El Cerrito is also considering the potential impact of proposed changes on its shadowing and daylight plane requirements on aesthetics and visual resources. I think El Cerrito is doing it right. I don't think Albany is. Thanks.
Hi, this is Margie Marks. I'm calling on behalf of Albany Thrives Together. We sent you a document. I'm going to try not to repeat any of that. I want to point out real quickly, there is one error in the document under section 3I, where it talks about the drop-in center that was established and ran continuously from 2017 until COVID. It was only open 2 mornings a week, not 3 mornings a week. Before I forget about it, I want to thank the city. The city has spent money on housing. The city spent, I think it's the $2.3 million we got from the A1 fund on the Saha project. As a citizen, I appreciate that and thinks it's a good use of our housing money. We at Albany Thrives Together are really big fans of the housing coordinator. We feel you can't hire this person soon enough. They could really help fulfill a lot of the goals and make them come to fruition that we approve of that are in this housing element. So we'd like to see that done. What we're very disappointed about in the housing element is under, you probably can guess it, program 5C, which is the rent review. We at Albany Thrives Together are plan on coming back to the council regarding just cause for eviction and real rent control for Albany renters. But right now we're looking at the housing element, and the recommendation in the housing element is simply to review the rent review system and strengthen it. Well, the rent review system doesn't work. Look at the numbers of people that have used it. That should be some signal to you. Even if people know about it, they're afraid to use it because of their landlords. I did a talk about housing at the senior center. All of the people in that room, aside from one, were renters. Not one single one of them had ever heard of the rent review program, or if they heard of it, which they might have at one time, because I think the senior center let them know, they don't remember it. So people are not availing themselves of it, even if they know about it. They're afraid that their landlords will retaliate further against them. So that's the part. And I understand it's not going to be done immediately, but we would like you to put in the housing element that you're going to do more than just evaluate the system and see if it needs to be strengthened. You really need to do a lot more on behalf of the renters, who are 52% of the population. And what's the worst part of that is, of those renters, 53% are cost burdened and 25% are severely cost burdened. That's a big part of our population. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Brian Martin. I'm a resident on the 600 block of Adams Street. I sent an email in earlier, and I wanted to add that I am hearing concern about, and during the previous comments, questions that about satisfying the state equity qualifications. When the census tract I'm in, that has the bowling alley and the 11-acre parcel on Albany Hill, have identified as opportunity sites or are under active development. And yet the census tract has been identified as one of the poorest in town and one of the least white, and is slated to have the most housing according to the current setup here. So I'm hearing the concerns about that, and I'm glad to hear there are concerns about that, because there should be concerns about that. And I wanted to point out one way to get around this, I think, is to do, as I said in my writing, and I've said previously, is to at least improve the equity in the city. Is to do exactly what the housing element says, which is to spread the opportunities for development around the city. The city, as you well know, the city can't mandate development. The city it can't do its own development except on its own property, but it can set up the characteristics that will kind of allow opportunities to happen. And so that those would mean, for example, fourplexes by right in what's currently R1 zoning, and not just duplexes. I would like to see further explanation as to why the city is deciding to stick with duplexes. And I don't want to hear that, oh yeah, you can always add ADUs and you can always add junior ADUs, and just fourplexes by right is a very different, very much straightforward, simpler thing. And then of course also being more aggressive on Solano Avenue. So I think it's honestly embarrassing that the one property that's in development right now is one that isn't even in the opportunity, wasn't identified as one for the state, as 1600 Solano Avenue. So I think the city needs to show a greater attention to equity by being more aggressive on Solano Avenue, and needs to explain if the city is going to keep the current height limit on Solano Avenue, which it didn't do for San Pablo Avenue in the specific plan. First of all, I think it needs to change the height, and it also needs to, or if it doesn't, it needs to have a full explanation as to why it doesn't. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Yes, I'm Peter Campbell with the Albany Property Rights Advocates, known as APRA, APRA. And we believe that housing isn't important. We represent the rental providers in Albany. We believe that housing is an important and essential component of any community. And of course, Albany is no exception to that. We also believe that the goals that have been addressed in we believe that Goal 5, which addresses the issue of fair housing and housing security and a bias, is a biased and one-sided manner. So it's obvious that the Albany rental providers have not been consulted on these issues, as has been admitted. I want to back up a little bit, though, and thank you for all the work that has gone into it. But we do have these concerns about where this issue is going and what the tenor is. We urge you to remember that housing in Albany is supposed to be a plan for increasing housing in Albany. And as far as we can tell, this is not a plan to do that. It's a plan that creates unnecessary disincentives to construction of housing. Also remember, if it were not for rental housing providers, there would be absolutely no rental housing available for anyone. So remember the providers, make sure they have some incentives to do what they do and make it worth their while. And I think this plan needs to address that concern, and it doesn't seem to do it the way it is right now. You need to promote the industry of providing rental housing. Don't attack it. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Lois Brown. I see in the plan that it's a wonderful safety net for tenants, but there is no safety net for the small landlords who will play a large part in this plan. And I'm just wondering, you know, what you can do for us when the rent doesn't come in and we can't evict. I mean, you just leave us dangling there. And I just wish you would think about the small landlord, because so much of Albany is made up of small landlords. And as far as I can see, this plan doesn't address us at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I have a few questions and comments. I wanted to start with, one of my questions is, somewhere, I don't know if it was in your presentation or when I was reading the whole document, but there was a shared housing versus short-term rentals. And I was wondering how, I think that the shared housing idea is great, and limiting short-term rentals, I think it should be even more limited, but I was wondering how somebody's monitoring the difference between those two things, how you tell what somebody's doing. So that's one of my questions. I also want to say that I completely support not including the UC Berkeley Village because one, it's limited to a certain group of people, and also people have to leave after a certain amount of time. So they basically get evicted once they're not a student anymore. So it doesn't seem like a good source of housing. I had a comment about using the term "the disabled." I think it's not a good term. And I also, even special needs, both of those terms, I don't know if the special needs or even the disabled are state terms, but I would question them. And maybe I would encourage you to talk to people who work with people with disabilities and maybe get some better language for that. I appreciate the commitment to involving community members, as Jeff, I think, said at the beginning of the meeting. I was wondering if somebody could talk more about why, Barry, I think, was talking about how the compliance, there's only 10% have been certified. I was wondering what were the issues that came up that those 10%, that those 90% were not certified. I'd just be curious to know where people are not accomplishing what they're supposed to accomplish. I looked at one of the slides that you had numbers on it that said area, units, approved, 309 ADUs, et cetera. And I was wondering if there was a way of telling with those numbers how they fell into match the numbers from the group in that chapter 3 that talks about extremely low, very low, if there's an overlap, so you can sort of tell what's happening with it. It's just like I couldn't put those two things together. I really appreciate the affirmatively further fair housing. Just wanted to mention that. I am been sorry to see over the years the city has been approving buildings that don't have elevators, and I think that would be one way of having accessible buildings, and also opportunities to provide funding for universal basic income would address people who have lower incomes. That I think the city should make more of a commitment to that. And I support the idea of the housing coordinator, and also I support just cause eviction and rent control. And then I just wanted, this is Mary, this is for you. the yellow stars, even though they're 5-pointed and not 6-pointed, I would suggest you don't use yellow stars in because of the connection. You probably know what I'm talking about. And I just would suggest not using that. And then my other suggestion is the transitions that you do between slides are hard for people with low vision, and are not as accessible. So just 2 suggestions for your PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any other hands raised. Bring it back to council for comments. Are any council members who would like to comment? All right, well, I don't think I see, yes, Councilman McQuaid.
Well, I'll start, but I think you were saying something. Why don't you finish your sentence and then I can start?
I was just going to kick off if nobody else would, so
Well,
please.
why don't you go ahead and I'll follow you.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Do-si-do. You were first to pick up some of the public comments. Let's see, what is low income for an ADU? If you happen to know.
Again, it's going to go back to the sliding scale that we were talking about earlier, depending on household size.
Yeah, okay. So it's basically the same as it would be for any residence versus household size versus area median income. Okay, thank you.
Right.
Let's see, is there anything in the housing element regarding residences for youth or for, I guess, people who have just become adults?
I don't believe there's anything specific for youth other than students.
Okay, thank you. And there was a comment about this plan only covering 8 years and doing all this development in 8 years and then nothing beyond that. Could you speak to that?
Yes, happy to. So we'll be required to do a new housing element in 2030 that goes from 2031 to 2039, unless the state changes the way it does this. But this is done every 8 years, so there'll be another plan. And there may be updates to other plans in between.
And is this the 6th plan?
This is the 6th housing element, yeah.
And the previous ones were all 8 years? So that gives us
the time frame varied. There were periods in the 80s and 90s where they were longer.
Okay.
They covered longer time frames.
So it's been going on for 50 years or so, something
right.
like that. Okay, thank you. So question about shared housing versus short-term rentals. How are they defined or discriminated, and how is all that monitored?
And I would say with respect to shared housing, there's really 2 types. There's the casual shared housing where you just put an ad in the paper on Craigslist online and you find a housemate. But what we're talking about here are actual nonprofit services that they pair people. So they actually are, it's professional services that will work with applicants and persons who are looking for housing and match them together. So there's contracts involved and long-term monitoring, and it's a more formal arrangement than just something where it's more casual and individually arranged.
Got it, thanks. And the short-term rentals, that was a question. I mean, I think you know what short-term rentals are, but how is all that monitored?
Jeff?
Yeah. Our finance department contracts with a service that monitors those short-term rentals, the Airbnbs and so forth, and to ensure that they have business licenses. At the moment, we don't have a use permit process or anything like that for those types of uses.
It's a little slightly off, but if you happen to know, and you may not, at the moment, how many short-term rentals there are in Albany?
I'm sorry, I don't
okay.
know off the top of my head.
Yeah, no problem. Just very curious about the competition for people who are living here. That's what I'll say at the moment. I've got more after that, but anybody else would like to take over? Councilmember McQueen?
Okay. Thank you. First, I want to thank Mr. Miller for your work on this. It's been a long process, and you've been with us before, and I'm always appreciative when I know you're doing this. And also, I want to thank Jeff and your staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission. They've all put quite a bit of time and effort into this, and certainly the public, who many of you have been at every meeting, and some of you are coming in now, and it's just always great to hear all these different voices. I have, sort of following in, I think, what Julie said, I have a couple of language changes that I'll say, but then I'll email them to you, Jeff, if you want to look at them later. Yes, I think in the implementation policy, it should be in the title, it's not just the disabled, but persons with disability or persons who are differently abled. I think on policy 3.4 on attachment B, supportive housing, in putting the same language as in policy 3.6 into 3.4. Goal 5, fair housing. It says basically regardless of disability. I think it should be regardless of ability. Let's see, on attachment A, implementation policy, changing the language instead of calling out some of the school district, what they're now referring to as affinity groups, simply referring to them as the Albany Unified School District affinity groups. So it's a little more generic, but it does include all of them. And then make some random thoughts. I think it was a good suggestion to think about how we could do some transitional age use in some of these projects. I don't know if they would come into specialized. I'm not quite sure how that fits in, but I think that's a category that we might want to consider. And I think Jeff, both you and Mr. Miller made a good point that this is a framework going forward, that these aren't policies, but they're a framework for developing policies. And I hope that all of the parties, the city is able to work with all of the parties to come together with something that meets everybody's needs. As far as density bonus, I would like to encourage very low or extremely low units as density bonus amenities. I'm not sure we can do that, but I'd certainly like to see that. I'm very interested in partnerships with the nonprofits, with the County Housing Authority and the state in creating a variety of projects or purchasing units. And I've actually started some conversations with some of these organizations. And this could include the senior housing or other special opportunities, or even now the youth housing. I like the idea of cross-generational opportunities where you have seniors and young people living in the same, I'm going to say facility for lack of a better term right now. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for both. And we need to keep an eye on the MCC is looking at a regional housing bond. So we want to kind of keep an eye on that and make sure that there aren't too many bonds going out at the same time. And during that discussion at the last MTC meeting, there was discussion about making sure that smaller cities had a voice in, and an opportunity to use the funds and weren't eliminated. On policy 5-7, which talks about housing discrimination education, there's a wonderful visual display on redlining that I saw several years ago, and I was working on bringing it to Albany, but then COVID came along and it kind of derailed that. But I'd like to continue working on that. And lastly, implementation policy 5A talks about a fair housing test. I think would be a valuable tool to see. It's one of those, we don't know what we don't know. So I would encourage doing that. And I think for now, those are all my comments.
You're muted, Mayor Jordan.
I'm worried my headphones are not creating a nice environment for people because I'm hearing some crackling on my end. Councilmember Gary, I saw that you had your hand up. I don't know if you wanted to go first.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor.
Sure.
So my question is under goal 5, when you speak on program 5F, expand community awareness of historical redlining and housing discrimination practice. What does that look like? And then after you have made the community aware, what are the next steps? What's the plan to move something forward, solutions? What are we doing?
You're no, Mr. Miller, you're muted. Yeah.
I realize that. And yeah, I think we kept it broad in the program description because it's to be determined what we do with the information. We don't have there's not really a plan for how to do this awareness and education or do the follow-up. I think that's something that needs to be determined through a community process. It's a need that was recognized, and we've put it in the document so that it can be fleshed out once it's adopted.
Thank you. Can you expand more on program 5H in the same manner? As far as the community outreach, what steps are you taking? Any thought process on how to broaden that statement? That's program 5F under goal 5.
Yeah, so that's equitable, inclusive outreach. And I think, at least I would say this is not just related to housing. This is related to, all city services and just being intentional and inclusive in the way we do outreach, bringing other, having meetings in multiple languages, just doing more to engage all of our residents in our processes and make sure that everyone can be included and everyone has access. Again, I think there are other city programs that are doing this, and this is really kind of building on that with an eye toward housing.
You stated that maybe Jeff Bond stated this, that the city partners or have service with someone that's controlling the short-term services. What is the name of the organization?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question. Would this be?
It's regarding short-term rentals. You said that the city contracts services to monitor that, but I didn't hear the name of the organization that does that.
I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the organization. It's a private consulting firm that specializes in this. They buy or have access to the database from the various internet-based companies like Airbnb, and then they provide that to municipalities. And I'm drawing a blank on the name of the provider.
Is it public? Is it available to the public to look at just so we can see the short term?
I can chime in because I just searched for it in the planet's.
Thank you.
The name of the organization is Host Compliance.
Yes. 2
separate words, capital each.
And I would imagine that's public information. I don't think there's anything there that would be restricted from providing to people if they were interested.
And so my next question is back to the affordability, and I know we're relying on the county's, affordable scale. Is there anything prohibiting the city for developing its own? And that way we're defining what affordability in Albany will look like for residents that are interested in renting or owning homes here.
I think if there are local funds that are being generated, you can decide your own, but most of these are using state and federal program funds. And so you're kind of limited to whatever the guidelines are for those programs that are set by other agencies at a higher level.
All right, that's all for now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Geary. Councilmember Nason.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I think my previous questions, to the extent that they included comments, were, I won't revisit those. I did want to make the comment that, so I read through this and it's like this new program and that new program and that new program and this program that we planned before, but we didn't do it, and on and on and on. It seems awfully aspirational to me. And I realize, you know, that we need to persuade the state that we have a plan and a program, and we're serious and we're dedicated to it. And I think that's all true. But I do think we're making a lot of promises here that we're going to have a real challenge to fulfill them. Some of them, and I'm thinking particularly the TOPA and rent stabilization, you know, are creating a lot of concern on the property owners' part. I think that if a year from now we're not doing them, there's going to be a lot of concern on the tenants' part, and we may be we might actually be better off focusing on something somewhat more narrow. And I'm thinking just cause eviction of some, not the just cause eviction that is necessary to make rent stabilization work, but just cause eviction in the more general sense, which is in place in a number of places and effectively creates a better balance of power to dissuade landlords from evicting people while offering, without making it impossible to do in the case of a landlord-tenant relationship that has completely broken down. So one comment I have is I would rather not see rent control or TOPA in there if they are not things that we are really going to be able to do anything about. The other thing, I know that tenant activists are often very anxious about losing rental stock, and I think that's a legitimate concern in the economy of California that turned so much against building new apartments. But there's also great value in offering people the opportunity to buy a condominium. We talk about missing middle, and I think that people in the middle, people with median incomes, if they are a couple, and and especially if they have children, they would really like to be able to buy something. And I don't think it's a bad thing to allow condominium conversions in an environment where additional rental units are also being built, or vice versa, allowing condominium units to be built. And that's really what TOPA is getting at, you know, that it's actually your rental units might sell for $500,000 that would be $1 million for new construction. Maybe allow conversions for those lower priced purchase opportunities for people in the middle. And that's just one of those areas, and there are many of them in all this, where there's a tension between incentivizing people to provide more and assuring that they do not, that there is not an abuse of power with respect to the housing provider tenant relationship. So that's my main comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Yes, Vice Mayor Tiedemann. Thank you, Councilmember Mason.
Thank you. Just first a question from the public comment, which I don't think we got an answer on, of the why we're doing duplexes and not fourplexes by right in the R1 zoning. I think this is in 1A.
So we have left the option open of looking at triplexes and fourplexes in the way that the program is phrased. I think it's really more evaluation of how many potential units we would be talking about would need to be done. Looking at things like our lot sizes and the placement of buildings on lots, and that level of analysis hasn't been done at this point. So there need to be some more land use analysis, I think, before the city could, affirmatively say it's going to allow 4 units on every lot.
Okay, thank you. So on that and a couple other things, I'm mostly quite happy with how this has turned out and all the policies and programs. As Councilmember Nason pointed out, this is a lot of goals and a big lift, but I think that is the necessity. And, there's a reason we have to do these housing elements. It's because, and there's a reason our RENA numbers have gone up. It's because we have to be doing big lifts like this. And this is just like the San Pablo specific plan of we are creating the necessary preconditions for housing to be created with some of these goals. On some of these, I'd love us to go just a little bit farther. And I think from my questions earlier and the answer I just got then, I think the answer on all of them is kind of going to be, we could do that, but we have to do a little bit more analysis of when we talk about it I'd love to see us for Solano increase the FAR a little further, increase the height a little further. I'd love to have fourplexes by right in residential zoning. And I'd love to put back, not having the front setback, even in residential areas. And just, go a little bit farther on what we can do to increase our housing stock on everywhere. Otherwise, I think this is really good. On the rental protections, I just wanted to say, for a long time, we didn't have a ton of data on how some of these rental protections, especially rent control, affected housing production. We do have that data from some tests. It does not negatively affect production, and it does protect people who are there from getting displaced. So I think having these rental protections we're talking about, maybe making our rent review and tenant, I'm forgetting the name of the program, tenant landlord relation program stronger, having more rent control, having TOPA, all of these are good things that we can do to protect renters who have been going through a very difficult time with the pandemic, and also just with rising housing costs overall. So thank you to everyone who's been a part of this. This has been a big effort, and I'm looking forward to us sending it to HCD.
Mayor, you're muted.
Oh, I know. Councilmember Nason.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot one thing that I was going to include in my comments, and that had to do with the node that was under discussion regarding San Pablo and Marin. And I speak as a former tenant of 1111 Marin, right behind the gas station. I feel like the whole residential over retail approach has become so popular that it's almost become kind of an exclusive mode. It's what you see everywhere you go. And unfortunately, now we're in a phase in which, retail is not doing well. And I wanted to just raise the fact that residential over retail originally was considered a form of sort of natural affordable housing because it's not so desirable to live above retail. Often, many retail uses are not really all that compatible with having upstairs neighbors. And I wanted to just bring up the possibility of having more more areas zoned, perhaps an extension of that node at San Pablo and Marin. It seems to me that far western, the most westerly blocks between San Pablo and Masonic seem like a natural place to have multifamily that is not necessarily residential over retail. A very common one is residential in many cities is residential over office space, where, you know, most of your tenants are out working during the day and the downstairs offices are being used. And it's particularly desirable for older people who might appreciate having doctors and dentists and a concentration of services in their area. So I wanted to raise that possibility, just as a thing to think about perhaps for the future. The other is I just wanted to add my thanks. I think this is an amazing piece of work and an amazing amount of work, and really a very good thing to see. Thank you.
Councilor McQuaid.
Thank you. I wanted to add, because I forgot to mention, and I think sort of jumping on what Councilmember Nason mentioned earlier, is giving people the opportunity to purchase homes is important in this. And whether it's some of the little houses that we see north of Brighton that, you know, we often think, well, we don't really need those, but those certainly could be opportunities for first-time homeowners. There are opportunities for some single-family homes and also condo conversions. And I think we all understand that building generational wealth actually comes more from home ownership than anything else. So we don't want to exclude that. And I think it's in the plan, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a comment made that this draft element does not support creation of new residences. I don't agree. I think you've done great work. Thank you for doing it. It's obviously part of what motivated the San Pablo specific plan, and will motivate changes to the building sizes on Solano and the R1. Regarding the R1, I wouldn't support fourplexes by right on all lots. I think that's a pretty big reach on a 2,500 square foot lot. So maybe duplexes on the 2,500 and triplexes on the 3,750 and fourplexes on the 5,000. And I don't support eliminating the setback, although I know none of this is really what is being defined here tonight. This will be studied in the future, but I think it's an opportunity for each of us to say where we're at for when that comes back to us. I do support pursuing credit for the graduate student apartments that are planned, to the extent that UC doesn't provide housing for students, so students compete on the open market, which certainly contributes to rent escalation and displacement. So, you know, housing supply is housing supply. I would be interested in some kind of a box or a sidebar in the draft that comes back to us on AB 1492 and what it does and does not do. So that's information germane to me, and considering what, if any, additional renter protections are needed, since that state law is of some recency. We received questions about where's the evidence that there's a redlining problem. I think the evidence is taking the opportunity to make a statement. The evidence that there's a redlining problem is there was redlining in Albany, but in the case of Albany, there was no area that was within the red line. Albany was completely exclusive in that regard. And I think you see that moving forward into our demographics today. So there's definitely a longstanding problem. Regarding housing discrimination, Councilmember McQuaid said it, you know, we don't have data whether that's happening or not. So having those tests done, I certainly support that, to collect that data and see what's going on. I appreciate the code enforcement item. I certainly have my own anecdote of lack of code enforcement when I moved with my wife into an apartment in Albany, and the flue box on the wall heater cracked unknown to us. We started smelling some strange smells called PG&E, and the person came out and said, oh, you could have been one of those couples that woke up dead in the newspaper because of the crack and the flue. And that was only the beginning of the problems with that residence. I've heard anecdotes from other people who've rented, even up to the property owner saying to them, yeah, well, if you don't like it, you can get out. And this is why I only own property in Albany, because there's no code enforcement, so I can pretty much do whatever I want. So these are anecdotes. These are not data, but I think we need data, or we at least need code enforcement. So I'm very much in support of that. I suggest adding the history or at least mentioning Coordinates Village to the program in 5F, because while that wasn't redlining, that's very, very germane to the history here. I appreciated that the council was provided a link to an article on that history early in my tenure here, which was history I didn't know about, which was that it was a remarkably integrated community that came out of World War II, but that the Albany City Council, among other entities in the area, worked actively to eliminate it. So again, changed the reality that we have today. I generally don't like the word unit. I find unit is often applied to a residence that's in a multi-residence building, and house or home is applied to a detached single residence building. I wouldn't say that's consistently the case, but there is some slight feel of that in the language. I would prefer that unit is replaced with residence throughout, because I also find unit to be kind of subtly dehumanizing. I suggest replacing family throughout, except for where the context specifically calls for families. For instance, the term multifamily building is used. Well, that building may not have only families in it. It may have cohabiting adults who are not family. So I think it's exclusive to refer to it as a multifamily building. It could be referred to as a multi-residence building. And similarly, eliminate or replace single family. For instance, replace single family zoning reform with single residence zoning reform. Because again, those residences aren't reserved for families. It's reserved for whoever owns them and however they want to configure the household with whoever they live with. And yeah, with that, that's what I have. I very much appreciate your work on this and look forward to the draft coming back. So unless there are further comments, I think we are looking for a motion to approve the release of the draft housing element for public comment.
So moved.
Seconded.
It's been moved by Councilmember Nason to release the draft for the 30-day comment and seconded by Vice Mayor Tiedemann. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mayor, I did have one suggestion on Goal 5, Program C, regarding the evaluation of the effectiveness of the rental review program. I think there needs to be more stronger language, basically, to determine if it stays or if it be eliminated, something to that effect.
Thank you, Councilmember Geary. I see staff took note of that. Director Bond.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jordan. So I'd just like to get clarification on your motion. In my introduction, I talked about coming back on September 6th. But having just heard your motion, we would not, if I understand the motion correctly, we thus would not need to come back on September 6th. We'd make the changes that you discussed. We have the 30-day comment period, and then make any additional changes that we as staff feel comfortable making from those comments that we might receive. And but the important point being is, again, as I'm understanding the motion that was just made and seconded, that we would not return on September 6th. So if you could clarify that for us.
That was my motion. I had forgotten about September 6th. My apologies. But I feel I'm comfortable. If the staff is comfortable and the rest of the council is comfortable, I'm comfortable with my motion and going forward and not coming back on September 6th. But I'm happy to change my motion if that is anyone's preference.
I have some inclination for it to come back September 6th. Part of my motivation is that chapters 1 through 5 and appendices A through C in their draft form were not posted as attachments to this agenda. So while I don't know that any of those would generate any comments, I'm a little concerned that the full package wasn't attached to our agenda. So as a matter of process, I'd prefer if it came back September 6th, the full package.
Okay, then I will change my motion.
Please, thank you.
Actually, do we need a motion?
In that case, I think we've just taken your comments and we would incorporate them as best we can and be back to see you again on September 6th.
So I guess, I think I take that as we don't need a motion.
That's correct. I'm sorry. I should have just
that's
answered.
fine. That's fine.
No,
Sure.
I withdraw my motion. Thank you.
Okay. Slightly anticlimactic, but got it done. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Miller, for all your work. And Director
Thank you.
Bond, I know you're probably sticking around for the third item.
I am. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. So
Thanks.
we move on to item 3-2, which is an update on potential policing commission appointments. Welcome, City Clerk.
Good evening, Council. The item before you is to provide an update on the applications received to date for the city's policing commission. The call for policing commission application was announced in early May. A total of 13 complete applications have been received to date. Staff has provided a few different timelines or actually two main timelines in the staff report for the appointment to the policing commission. And tonight, staff is seeking council direction on which option would be feasible with consideration of the training and orientation as required in the resolution establishing the commission. With that, I'd like to check with the council if you'd like me to walk through the different options or it's as stated in the staff report. Let me know. Thank you.
Yeah. So would any council member like further explanation or description, or does any council member have a question? Yes, Councilmember Nason.
I do have a question. Do we have any outstanding, have we received any complaints since we last considered this, any complaints about policing in Albany? Or do any of I won't use the word complaint, but do any of the sort of anecdotal comments that we've had in the past about, somebody feeling they were not treated properly, are any of those are any of those to be transmuted into an actual complaint that we can that the city could look into the facts?
I'll defer this question to the city manager, but as for the city clerk's office, we have not received any formal complaints. If that's what there are comments that are submitted, but the clerk office did not receive any formal complaint. Okay.
Do we have, city manager, do we have any formal complaints or informal complaints that the informal complainant has expressed an interest in turning into a formal complaint?
To my knowledge, in that time frame, no, we do not. And those would be a claim filed through the city clerk's office, and we have not received any.
Okay. Well, then I'll make a comment if I can.
We might hold comments till after, public comment.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Nason. Councilmember Gary.
Thank you, Mayor. I noticed that some of the comments, or at least emails, regarding the police bulletin. I know I used to receive them on a regular basis, and I've noticed some other residents ask me what happened to those notifications coming out by email. Can someone please provide an update on that?
I think that might be off the agenda topic.
Okay.
So I would encourage you to, absolutely, that's of interest. I would encourage you to take that up with staff and or maybe write it up and submit it.
Complaints, and so that was the one that I received. So if that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I apologize. It took Councilmember Nason's reference to complaints as having a nexus with the resolution that establishes the policing commission as having review power with regard to public information associated with complaints. Are there any other questions from the council this time? Okay, then go to a member of the public. And 3 minutes, please, City Clerk. Welcome.
Oh, yeah, this is Jeremiah Garrett Pinguello. You know I got a complaint against the police department for police brutality against myself. Okay, my wife, Elaine Videa, passed away September 25th, 2020. I got off work at the Port of Oakland, 3 a.m. I got home to my front door unlocked. My wife in a very tragic, bloody disaster. Okay. I called 911, called the Albany Police Department. The police department arrived, 4, 5, 6 units. I had one officer grab me by one leg, one officer grab me by my other leg. One officer grabbed one arm, one officer grabbed my other arm, another officer grabbed my waist. And I was giving my wife CPR. What did the police do? Run in there, grab me. They rip my wife's body from my hands, throw me out of my house, tell me I did it. They take pictures of my house everywhere, pictures everywhere. I said, why are you taking pictures? Oh, it's a crime scene, they said. The next morning, I woke up with over 50 bruises on my body. I walked right down to the police station in shorts and flip-flops, no shirt. An officer came outside and took pictures all up and down my body. What did I do the next day? Filed the public records request. The police department say, oh, there's some police code where we don't have to release any of this records to you. Well, why not? It's my records. My wife passed away. What are the police hiding? The police are hiding police brutality. They don't want me to have those photos. They don't want me to have body cam evidence. And what did Nicole do, city manager? She went and paid some private detective $100,000. So he said, no, the police didn't do any brutality. That private detective got to review the video camera, body cams. The news called Albany police. They wouldn't even release the photo camera to the news. So the police are hiding police brutality. I'm filing a formal report ASAP, and you'll get my email right now.
Not seeing any other hands raised. I'm sorry for the experience of the last speaker, not in terms of necessarily any action on the city's part, but it sounds like an absolutely terrible situation. Not seeing any other hands raised. We'll bring it back to council. What is the preference of the council here? Vice Mayor Tiedemann.
First, I just want to thank staff for diligence in bringing this back to us and offering us the options of what to do here. I would recommend that we go with option A, which is appointing during the current term.
Thank you. Councilmember Nason.
Yeah, I'm, as someone who is termed out, and I'm going to be stepping down in December, I have some reluctance about starting this up, asking someone to do this for 3 months and then stopping and starting up again. I'm particularly reluctant in light of the difficulty that we're having filling commission vacancies, and the fact that, at least I understand, that there's going to be some kind of review because of the extraordinary amount of staff time and effort that goes into these committees, that we're going to be looking at streamlining them and perhaps consolidating or reducing the number of committees and commissions. In all of these circumstances, I would really prefer not to appoint anyone. If the majority feels strongly about going forward, my preference would be that to allow the council to make my own appointment, so that the person who is appointed, to improve the likelihood that the person who is appointed will succeed in being reappointed by my successor on the city council. If they come in as, Rochelle Nason's appointment to the committee, it might not carry weight with the person who succeeds me on the council. Whereas if they come in as someone who was selected by the city council as a whole, perhaps they would have they would be more likely to be reappointed. So my preference would be option B, but I don't, if the majority of the council feels like getting this going, and so that, and I don't know if Jeremiah's complaint, which I gather was thoroughly investigated and was found not to be meritorious, if they want to take up that matter. If that's the will of the council, I'm fine with it. But I'd rather not appoint anyone.
Thank you. Councilwoman Quaid.
Thank you. I agree with part of what Councilmember Nason said. I think there's a lot of work that goes into sort of preparing for this with the Brown Act training and other trainings that are in the resolution. So I would hesitate to start it in September. Maybe they don't really start till October and they're done in December. I don't agree with having the council appoint for her and myself who are terming out. I feel really strongly that I was elected to serve until the new council takes over in December, and I need to do the job all the way till then. So I don't agree with that idea. I think the timeline given is a little bit short. I interview all of the people that I appoint to committees, and I've actually been doing that with another opening I have right now. And between now and August 5th, with 13 people having applied, I would be hard pressed to interview them all and make a decision before August 5th. So without those two things in mind, I would prefer to wait.
Thank you. Councilmember Gary, I don't know if you have a particular opinion one way or the other. No, I am torn as well. It's been a long time coming. And so in that regard, I'm keen to move the process along. On the other hand, the prospect of people serving 3 months and then not continuing to serve on the body, the prospect that Councilmember Nason may choose not to appoint anybody. Either of those is a particularly great way to start a new body. So I'm really not sure. I'm not sure what to do here.
Can you just take a vote? Do all in favor for option A, and all in favor for option B? And then we just go from there.
I think somebody needs to make a motion first.
Okay.
Would anybody like to make a motion?
I will.
We had 3 hands go up, so go ahead. You spoke up first, Councilmember McQuaid.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was trying to find it on the thing here.
And while she's looking, I'll remind that substitute motions are a thing.
Okay, I would. So let me make sure that I have this right, because the last thing I want to do is make the wrong motion. Option B is that we wait and have the council appoint as they appoint the other advisory bodies in December, January time period. Is that correct? Do I have that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And I just want to add one more piece to this, is that the school board will has 3 candidates this time. And so I think it's fair to give them the new school board people, or the returning, whichever they are, the opportunity in the fall or the late fall, winter, to appoint somebody. Having said that, I move that we select option B, and period. Is that enough of a motion? Are you happy with that?
I think that is.
I could stop babbling now. Great.
City Clerk, yeah, go ahead.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, Vice Mayor Tiedemann.
I would offer a substitute motion that we go with option A.
Is there a second? I think it's going to have to come from me if there is one. Yeah, I think I've heard through the grapevine that 2 of the current school board members who are not termed out. I'll take a bail here and see the city clerk has her hand raised. City clerk, do you have something for us?
Sorry. Councilmember McQuaid asked earlier if it's the same appointment time as the other advisory bodies. Yes, it'll be for the next appointing term. However, because we already started having applicants called rather than the normal time, which is like beginning of December. So once the new council takes office, you may already have enough of a pool of candidates to start appointing right away. So it may be a little bit earlier than the other advisory bodies, unless you want to take all of the advisory body in one meeting, I guess.
That would be a lot. Yes, Councilmember McQuaid.
So I have a question then about that. Would we then, from basically today forward, leave the applications open so that additional people between now and the time that new council is seated and appoints could apply?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
So back to my fumbling around, given that slight break. I have heard through the grapevine that 2 of the 3 incumbent school board members who could each run are not planning on running. Of course, don't know what's going to happen until the end of the nomination period, but that does create the prospect of at least 4 of the 10 who would be making appointments turning over. And so that does raise the prospect potential, depending upon what configuration of school board members appoints, that even those 2 members could serve 3 months and then be replaced with somebody else. And if that were to happen, that would mean potentially 4 of 7 members turnover, which is really not ideal in so many ways. So I am going to have to leave it at that. And so the original motion stands. So there's further comments. City Clerk, if you could poll the council. And this is a motion by Councilmember McQuaid, seconded by Councilmember Nason, to leave appointment to the regular time period, the beginning of the new council session.
For option B.
Option B, yeah.
Councilmember McQuay,
Yes.
Councilmember Nason,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann,
No.
Councilmember Gary,
Yes.
Mayor Jordan,
Yes.
and the motion carries. And one clarification, but we could wait for this for when the new council takes office. Also, is in option B, there are sort of two options to make sure that there's enough time for interviews, over the winter holidays. So that can be decided later.
Yeah, perhaps by the new council. That might be an agenda item, one of his first agenda items.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it would be a courtesy to, if you can, City Clerk, to send a message to those who have applied, letting them know this action and briefly why it was taken. Because I can only imagine it's relatively frustrating to have gone through the effort of applying, some of them some time ago, and not knowing what's going on, not hearing back. Thank you for considering that. Okay, thank you for considering that. Thank you, Council. With that, we move on to item 3-3. It's an information item regarding storm drain improvements related to the planned housing development located at 540 San Pablo Avenue. Thank you, city staff, for sticking with us. We have about 12 attendees other than city staff at the moment. Welcome back.
Thank you. Waiting for my colleague, Mark Hurley, to come up on the screen as well.
Certainly. Welcome, Director Hurley. And welcome, Associate Engineer Lamb. Oh, maybe I'm jumping ahead. I think he heard me. Very good.
So good evening again, Mayor and Council members. My name is Jeff Bond, the Community Development Director. I'm going to do a quick introduction, then turn it over to my colleagues. We're here this evening with an informational item that's a little bit unusual regarding storm drain infrastructure improvements associated with a housing development project at 540 San Pablo. 540 San Pablo is better known as the Albany Bowl. It's a site that's 2.2 acres, and back on October 18th, 2021, the council approved design review, density bonus, and a street tree removal for a 207-unit mixed-use apartment building. That project is currently in building permit review. Our department, Public Works Department, Fire Department, among others, are taking a look at the technical details of that application. And in the building permit process is typically the time we get into the details of what's going on in a project like this. The purpose of this is to give you a briefing on the need for a cost sharing agreement with the housing developer that's going to be related to the relocation and capacity expansion of the storm drain infrastructure that's presently there today. And basically our expectation is that we'd be coming back to you at a future council meeting with a proposed agreement that addresses size, the alignment, cost sharing, any easements, funding sources, and any other aspects of this that we need to have in agreement. We wanted this evening to just give you a preview of that since it is a little bit unusual. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Public Works Director Mark Hurley to talk a little bit about the engineering side of it.
Sure, thanks, Jeff. And good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Mark Hurley, Public Works Director, and I'm going to give you a high-level overview of the project. Let me use the figure that we included in the staff report as a guide. Let's see, I think this is it. So is everyone seeing that clearly? Is that a yes or?
Yeah, we see it.
Yes. Okay, good. So with this project, we're trying to solve two issues. The first issue is the location and sizing of the existing line. If you can see my cursor, the existing storm drain line runs diagonally across the project site, and it is actually underneath the existing bowling alley, and will actually be underneath the future building for the project site. This line is also multiple diameters. It ranges from 42 to 48 inches in diameter, and it was identified in the 1998 Stormwater Management Plan, as well as our current modeling that we're doing associated with this project, as undersized. So what we want to do is realign the line and upsize it. The realignment would follow Clay and then along the frontage of the project site, the western edge of the project site along Adams. And this is to get it out from underneath the building and really make it a municipal line that we can easily maintain for the long term. So the section on Clay would actually be in the public right of way. We think it's going to be right off the curb line on Clay. The section fronting Adams will actually be just within the project site. And this is done because we think we're concerned about the utilities in Adams Street, and we want to make sure that we're not impacting any of the water lines. There's a large PG&E gas transmission line that is in that area, so we think it's a much safer alignment to put it on just the edge of the project site. And so this would require an easement from the developer. We're anticipating this line to be either a 54 or a 48 inches in diameter. So it's going to be increased incrementally to handle the flows or deal with the constraints that were identified in the modeling. The second issue is actually a downstream constraint. This is, as this line crosses Adams Street, it crosses actually underneath several of the houses on the west side of Adams.
Pardon me, Director Hurley. I'm wondering if you might be able to zoom in on the area you're discussing, because it's pretty small.
I might have to, let's do it.
It's a PDF or something?
Yeah, let me see if I can do it. I'll stop share and then I'll reconfigure it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Just I think people will be able to follow along a little better if they.
Yeah, let me see if I can zoom in. I wanted to do it as a, let's see.
I don't know, my machine, I just, stayed out of full screen and zoomed way in and
sure thing.
PDF. Yeah, there we go.
Is that much better?
That is much better. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. So just for those that can't see, that couldn't see the prior one. So the existing line crosses the site. The red piece, we want to relocate it on the green alignment that gets it out from underneath the building footprints and in the public right of way along Clay and on the edge of the site on Adams. And then it connects back into the existing line, and then it crosses Adams and then goes underneath several of the homes on the west side of Adams. There's a downstream constraint in this section of pipe. This is the section running underneath the homes. So what we're proposing to do to deal with that, or to relieve that, the constraint, is to build a relief storm drain that heads north to Cerrito Creek. This we're expecting to be about a 24-inch line. It may go up a size or down a size depending on where the final modeling comes in. But it would be aligned within Adams on the eastern curb line, and it would be constructed in two phases. The first phase would bring it out and would be constructed as part of the development project, would bring it just to the edge of Adams where we can connect into some existing storm drain infrastructure. Then the second phase would upgrade that existing storm drain line, which is 12 to 18 inches in diameter, up to the 24 or potentially larger line, and then they would discharge into or outlet into Cerrito Creek at the same location as it currently does. And the reason for doing it in two phases is that we're taking advantage of the contractor being there, and the way the site utilities will come, there'll be a number of utility lines crossing that alignment. So doing it later, after the utilities are put in, would be much more cumbersome. And additionally, as we get into the orientation center's parking lot, we'll have to coordinate with them. There'll likely be some permitting that we'll have to do for the outlet in Cerrito Creek that we don't want to hold up the project. In advance of tonight's item, we did get a couple of comments that I probably want to touch on. The first is how this project can sort of improve the condition on San Pablo Avenue, and this is important for the San Pablo Avenue Complete Streets project, which would construct pedestrian improvements at several of the intersections, including Clay and Brighton. Earlier in the design, I think we were looking at bulb outs at these locations, and we chose not to proceed with the bulb outs because of drainage issues on San Pablo and needing to put in a separate storm drain system to make everything work. My sense is that this project could help it, but not completely eliminate the need for that separate storm drain system on San Pablo Avenue. So at this point, I don't think it would be, we're not in substantially different of a position than we were back when we evaluated this earlier in that design. There was also a question about coordinating of the utilities in Adams, because there are a lot, and there's actually some critical ones. Particularly, there's a large PG&E transmission gas line. We have selected the alignment so that we are avoiding that line as much as possible. We do plan to cross it twice. And this is why we selected the alignment we did, because we're going to follow the existing pipeline that already crosses this line. So we know we have a pathway to get over or under it, and we're going to pothole it just to confirm that we have the appropriate clearances. So we think we recognize that there's some critical utilities there. We think we have a good alignment. We're going to do some additional surveys to confirm things, and then adjust our design as we get that result. But we think we have a reasonable approach. And then the last one was coordination with a proposed bike and pedestrian bridge at Cerrito Creek. My thought on this is that so I haven't done specific coordination with that project, but my thought is that this project isn't going to materially change the situation at that location. We're going to match the existing grade as well as the location of the current outlet. It's just going to be incrementally larger. In fact, we're probably going to try to maintain the existing head wall structure so that we minimize the impact that we have to the creek. So my sense is it probably won't impact the future bridge any more than the existing line would have. And as far as funding, we don't have a good handle on the cost at this point, but we would anticipate that the funding of the city's component of the project to be funded through the Measure F Street and Storm Drain Fund. It's a personal tax that funds pavement as well as storm drain improvements throughout the city. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much. I will need to get to where I can see everybody here. I think it is useful to leave up the maps. I'll just on my end so I can see all the council members. Do any council members have any questions at this time? I am not seeing any. I have a few questions. The red line along the west side of Adams from Clay to the orientation center, that's an existing?
Yeah, we're showing it as existing. We've looked at it and it's very small and probably is in poor condition. So it's
yeah, I just want to make sure that's what it was. That's
exactly what it is. And it's
an area drain essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the first phase of the relief line, which is shown in solid purple.
Correct.
At the end of the first phase, is it going to be cross-connected into the line that goes along the south side of the orientation center? Is that the plan? Did I catch that?
No, it's actually, you could probably see it just underneath the dashed piece, and I can zoom in better. So there's, if you can visualize the orientation center parking lot, there's a valley gutter with a number of catch basins. We're going to follow that exact alignment, and we're going to actually match the inverts because we know there are no utility conflicts with that.
Okay. And so it's shown in phases just because, different timing for the two different permitting, whatever. Okay.
Correct. And my guess is the agreement that we're going to be bringing back for the funding of this will only address the first phase of this line. And the other one would be a separate city capital project that we would execute independently of the project.
Do you think there's any risk if the green line is sized up and the relief line has not been completed to the creek? Do you think there's any risk essentially putting more hydraulic throughput? I mean, you won't get more hydraulic throughput, but you're going to get more pressure potentially at the upstream end with backups of the orange line going underneath the homes.
That's what we're evaluating right now. Is to do that. And my sense is even in the interim condition, it would be an improvement over what we have right now. But when we get and I don't think it's something that we're going to look at waiting for the long term, but we won't get the complete benefit until the phase 2 is done.
Yeah, I'm just, so I was invited by the owner of so it goes under two houses. I was invited by the owner of the northern of the two houses that has the orange line under there to go out in October, end of October, of all things. So I went out there and that 5-inch and 24-hour storm, it was pretty amazing. They did report that they had substantial work done on their portion of the line in terms of having people go in there and shotcrete it. So I have more confidence in that. I don't know what the state of the line is under that southern house. That concerns me. If there's any fractures in that and it starts piping soil and then the whole thing collapsed, we're going to be a world of hurt. So I just make a note, as I know you are, to take great care. Obviously, it'd be ideal to get this all done, from the end of one rainy season before the next, but I understand that may not be possible. What's the state of practice now for design storms? I mean, we as a industrial civilization, we have exploded stationarity, which is the statistical concept that you can use the past to design for the future, and we can no longer do that. So we don't really know what future we're designing for. So how is engineering practice handling that now?
So we are following the Alameda County flood control standards for a system like this. And there's a number of criteria where it's a 10-year storm, but then you also look at the conditions within the creek for setting water elevation and this might be where David jumps in and helps out a little bit more. He was closer to the analysis piece.
No, typically, Mark's right that we would follow the Alameda County Flood Control District's hydrology manual for design of stormwater drainage and open channels and pipes. So, there's a comprehensive set of standards that we would follow, including looking at the available meteorological data going back into history to determine what that typically a 10-year storm would be.
So is that the last part of what you said doesn't make me particularly confident because again, past is not predictive of the future anymore. So do you know if their manual is taking account of regional climate models and what is projected to be coming at us?
I'm not aware of any upcoming updates to that manual.
Okay. But what the vintage of the manual is? Or does it have a methods section where it specifically describes, how they arrived at their definition of a 10-year storm? So you can see definitively, is it only based on past storm data, or is there any climate change component to it?
So we can check into that and probably circle back a little bit more. I know there is a component on the 10-year storm, but there's a number of sort of receiving water conditions and elevations that take into consideration different like tidal influences, king tides and such, and storm surges that I think factor into the analysis.
Yeah, so none of that would necessarily obtain because you're far enough up channel.
I think there is some impact on water surface elevation here, is from what I recall from the analysis. But we can circle back specifically on that.
Well, obviously, I'm keenly interested. I'll leave it there. But in terms of infrastructure resilience, I think this is a pretty critical question. So I would ask you to look at those standards skeptically, and if they don't include future projections, look into that. I'd be happy to help with that, given my sort of adjacent professional expertise. All right, I've gone on plenty long on that, but I think it's pretty important, because if that system doesn't work, it's kind of somewhat catastrophic for the city, at least portion of the city. So with that, let's see if I can bring up participants here. We have about, looks like 6 participants hanging out with us. One has their hand raised. Clerk, if you could admit them, please.
Yeah, hey, good evening, President. Hey, thank you, I appreciate it. So just real quick, this is the agenda item talking about the storm drain, right?
You got it.
Okay. So where's the storm drain? Is that on the street?
Well, I'm guessing you're on your phone maybe, and you can't see the map.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll describe it's the existing storm drain goes from the intersection of Clay and San Pablo and cuts diagonally to the northwest through the private property or underneath the private property. And the proposal is to essentially abandon that and build a new storm drain structure that would be on Clay and essentially on Adams. So it would be, not underneath any of the buildings. It's not good practice to have a storm drain, particularly one that's a main line like this underneath the building.
I see the picture now. Thank you. So, You know what? It goes to the creek. So but this thing's got to be filtered. We got to have filters. If we're going to have a storm drain going to the creek, we got to prevent people from dumping oil down it, runoff from the street, the oil and the gas on the street. So we got to have some serious filters going on, and we got to be able to maintain those filters. So, that's what needs to happen. Why don't gosh. Okay, so it's going private property. If this was going down San Pablo, I was going to say that Caltrans should be responsible for everything. So let's get the transportation department to make a recommendation, or if they haven't already, if this is the recommendation. But let's see what the transportation, has to say with it. But yeah, basically bottom line is, if we're going to be putting a storm drain to the creek, we need filters, because I've seen turtles living in that creek, and then it goes straight to the bay. And that's coming before the little bridge, little crossing, little hop, skip, and the jump from the Cerrito Park. And kids play in that creek. I mean, I play in that creek myself. So, eat, live, play in Albany, right? So if we're going to do anything, we need filters. So that's basically all I have to say there. And filters, and then maintenance, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Bringing it back to council. Are there any comments from council member? Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Peter Campbell here. I know nothing about storm drains other than those little placards on the drain grates in the streets that say dump no oil, or no dumping goes to the bay, and that the water goes to the bay. But I'm just curious, because of our current water situation, is there any way to consider salvaging that water rather than just dumping it into the bay? I suspect it would be very expensive, but has been any thought been given to that possibility? Thank you.
Thank you. My apologies again for not seeing that you had your hand raised. Looking at the list, I don't see anybody else with their hand raised. So coming back to council, are there any comments from council? Not seeing any. I will just raise those comments about filtration. It's an opportunity for staff to share information on that topic, because I know that's something that the city and all jurisdictions are working on, and also salvaging of water, stormwater runoff.
Sure, maybe I can jump in on both of those. In terms of, so yes, I think it's important to put clean water into into creeks. This water currently does go to a creek. We're just changing the location that it does, that it meets Cerrito Creek. But there's a lot of things that we're doing citywide to improve water quality. One of those is if you look around town, you'll see trash capture devices within storm drain inlets. So those are devices that trap large pollutants, not necessarily oils or things of that sort, but any sort of trash that would get into the system. We also have constructed several BMPs throughout the city, and these are devices that capture water and actually do provide treatment to help clean the water. Our latest one was constructed as part of the Washington Avenue pavement project. That's just under the BART tracks, or just on the east side of the BART tracks on the south side. We have another one planned for the Marin project, the Marin paving projects that's going to kick off here shortly. And that's in a similar location along Marin. And we're looking for opportunities throughout the city to do that. And it's actually becoming more and more of a requirement of our municipal stormwater permits. So that's something we're going to be doing more of. And then it's also just education about what to dump in storm drains and what not to. That's something that the public can do. And with respect to using the water for drought conditions, the BMPs do help with that, to infiltrate water. Unfortunately, a lot of our soils are clay, so infiltration doesn't happen as much as maybe some other places. But that's sort of a broad range of the things that we're doing for water quality purposes.
And if you could just define BMP.
Best management practice. That's green infrastructure, bioswales, detention basins, and so forth.
Thank you. Unless there's any other comment, I think we have done our diligence as a council. Staff, thank you for bringing these items to us and all your work on them. And I wish you good night, Vice Mayor Tiedemann, Councilmember McQuaid, Mason, and Gary. And thank you, city staff, city manager, city attorney, 2 directors, city clerk, and those members of the public that managed to stay with us, as well as probably Jeremy in the back room there. Thanks so much.
Have a good break, everybody.
We are adjourned.